December 8, 1980. John Lennon had less than 12 hours to live, and he knew something was wrong. 3 times that morning, he told Yoko he felt like someone was watching him. Twice he changed his plans to avoid being in public, but what John didn't know was that his killer had been planning this day for 2 months, and nothing John did would change what was coming. At 10:49 a.m. that morning, a photograph was taken that would become one of the most chilling images in music history. John Lennon stands outside the Dakota apartment building, signing an autograph for a quiet, pudgy man with thick glasses. That man is Mark David Chapman, and in 6 hours, he will use that same pen to reload the gun that kills John. The photograph captures the exact moment when predator and prey met for the first time, and neither man realized they were already locked in a dance of death. Tonight, we're reconstructing John Lennon's final day minute by minute, using FBI files, police reports, and witness testimony that was sealed for 40 years. This isn't just the story of a murder, it's the story of how a global icon spent his last hours on Earth, unaware that every decision he made was being watched, recorded, and used against him by someone who had been studying his movements with the precision of a military operation. To understand December 8, 1980, you need to understand who John Lennon had become by the end of his life. For 5 years, he had lived as a recluse in the Dakota, one of New York's most exclusive apartment buildings. He baked bread, raised his son Sean, and tried to forget that he had once been the most famous musician in the world. His neighbors included celebrities like Lauren Bacall and Leonard Bernstein, but John rarely socialized with anyone outside his immediate family. The Dakota itself was like a fortress. Built in the 1880s, it occupied an entire city block on the Upper West Side, with walls thick enough to muffle any sound from the street. The building had its own security staff, a doorman who knew every resident personally, and a courtyard entrance that was supposed to keep unwanted visitors away from the tenants. For John, who had received death threats regularly since 1966, the Dakota represented safety, privacy, and the possibility of a normal life. But on December 8, 1980, the Dakota's security had already been compromised for weeks. Mark David Chapman had been studying the building's routines since October. He knew which entrance John preferred, what time he usually left for appointments, and which doormen were most likely to be distracted by celebrity autograph seekers. Chapman had even befriended some of John's fans, who gathered outside the building daily, learning intimate details about John's schedule and habits. What made Chapman particularly dangerous wasn't his obsession with John Lennon, it was his intelligence. A former security guard himself, Chapman understood building security systems, crowd control, and most importantly, how to blend in with the harmless fans who surrounded celebrities every day. To the Dakota staff, he was just another Beatles enthusiast, hoping for a glimpse of his hero. The morning of December 8th began normally for John. He woke up around 9 a.m. in his bedroom overlooking Central Park, had coffee with Yoko while reviewing the day's schedule, and spent an hour playing with Sean in their living room. John had been in a good mood lately. His album Double Fantasy was climbing the charts. Critics were praising his return to music, and for the first time in years, he was talking about touring again. But even on that peaceful morning, signs of danger were already present. If you're fascinated by the untold details behind this tragic day, make sure to subscribe now. We're about to reveal information that the FBI kept classified for decades, and you won't want to miss what comes next. At 10:30 a.m., John's assistant called to confirm his 2 p.m. interview with Rolling Stone magazine. During that call, she mentioned that several fans had been asking the Dakota doorman about John's schedule, which was unusual. Most of John's fans were respectful of his privacy, but lately there had been more aggressive requests for information about his daily routine. John dismissed the concern. "It's probably just excitement about the new album," he told Yoko. "People are curious because I've been away for so long." What John didn't know was that Chapman had been calling music magazines and radio stations for weeks, posing as a journalist researching a story about John's comeback. Through these calls, Chapman had learned about the Rolling Stone interview, the studio sessions John had planned for that week, and even details about Sean's school schedule. The first face-to-face encounter between John Lennon and his future killer happened at 10:49 a.m. John left the Dakota that morning in an unusually good mood. He was wearing his favorite black leather jacket, the one Yoko had bought him for his 40th birthday 2 months earlier, and carrying a manila folder containing lyrics for songs he wanted to record the following week. He was planning to walk to the studio, a 20-minute journey he had made hundreds of times since moving to New York. As John approached the Dakota's entrance, he noticed a small group of fans waiting with albums and photographs. This was normal since Double Fantasy had been released. There had been a steady stream of Beatles enthusiasts hoping for autographs. John usually signed a few items when he was in a hurry, but that morning he felt generous. He had time before his interview, and the fans seemed genuinely excited to see him. Chapman was standing slightly apart from the other fans, holding a copy of Double Fantasy and looking nervous. When John approached, Chapman stepped forward with a shaky smile and said, "Mr. Lennon, I've been a fan since I was 12 years old. Would you mind signing this?" His voice was soft, almost childlike, and his hands were trembling as he held out the album. John took the album and looked at Chapman's face for the first time. Later, witnesses would say that John seemed to study Chapman for a moment longer than usual, as if something about the man struck him as odd. But John signed the album anyway, writing John Lennon 1980 in his distinctive handwriting, and handed it back with a smile. "Thank you so much," Chapman said, clutching the album to his chest. "This means everything to me." What none of the witnesses realized was that Chapman had just completed the first phase of his plan. The signed album wasn't a souvenir, it was evidence. Chapman wanted proof that he had been close enough to John to touch him, that John had looked directly into his eyes, that the famous musician had no idea what was coming. The autograph was a trophy from a hunt that wouldn't end until one of them was dead. Photographer Paul Gorish, who had been taking pictures of John that morning, captured the exact moment when Chapman received his signed album. In the photograph, John looks relaxed and happy, completely unaware of the danger standing 3 feet away from him. Chapman looks ecstatic, but if you examine his expression carefully, there's something unsettling about his smile. It's too wide, too intense, like someone who has just won a contest that no one else knew they were playing. After John left for his interview, Chapman remained outside the Dakota for the rest of the day. He showed other fans the signed album, talked excitedly about meeting his hero, and even helped a few tourists take pictures in front of the famous building. To everyone around him, he seemed like the happiest Beatles fan in New York. But Chapman's behavior contained subtle signs that something was wrong. Several fans later told police that Chapman kept checking his watch obsessively, as if he was waiting for something specific to happen. He asked detailed questions about John's typical routine, claiming he hoped to get another autograph later. Most disturbing of all, he repeatedly mentioned that December 8th was going to be a day people remember forever. The tragedy of December 8th wasn't just that John Lennon was killed, it was that his killer spent the entire day hiding in plain sight, surrounded by people who loved John and could have protected him if they had known what was coming. John's interview with Rolling Stone took place at the Hit Factory, a recording studio in Midtown Manhattan, where he had been working on Double Fantasy. The interviewer was Dave Sheff, a veteran music journalist who had been following John's career since the Beatles' early days. The session was supposed to last 2 hours, but John was so relaxed and talkative that it stretched into the afternoon. During the interview, John spoke openly about his 5-year hiatus from music, his relationship with Yoko, and his hopes for the future. He seemed genuinely optimistic for the first time in years, talking about plans to tour in 1981 and his desire to record another album with Yoko. "I feel like I'm just getting started," he told Sheff. "The last 5 years taught me that music isn't everything, but it also taught me that music is still what I do best." What made the interview particularly poignant was how John talked about his mortality. At one point, Sheff asked him about the dangers of being a public figure, and John's response would become heartbreakingly prophetic. "You can't live your life in fear," John said. "If someone wants to hurt you, they'll find a way. All you can do is try to put positive energy into the world and hope it comes back to you." While John was giving this interview, Chapman was conducting his own twisted preparation ritual outside the Dakota. Chapman had purchased a copy of The Catcher in the Rye from a bookstore near the Dakota and was reading it obsessively, making notes in the margins and underlining passages that resonated with his disturbed mental state. The book's protagonist, Holden Caulfield, despises phoniness and celebrity culture themes that Chapman had twisted into a justification for what he was planning to do. At 3:47 p.m., Chapman called his wife in Hawaii. The call lasted 17 minutes, and according to phone records obtained by the FBI, Chapman told her he loved her and apologized for everything that's about to happen. When she asked what he meant, Chapman said he couldn't explain but promised she would understand soon. Years later, she would describe the call as the most frightening conversation of her life, though she didn't understand why until much later. Don't forget to like this video if you're learning something new about this tragic day, and let me know in the comments, have you ever had an instinct that something bad was about to happen but couldn't explain why? That feeling might be more important than we realize. At 4:30 p.m., Chapman positioned himself across the street from the Dakota and began what he would later describe as his final surveillance. Using a small pair of binoculars, he watched the building's entrance, timing the doorman's rotations and noting which angles provided the best lines of sight. He had studied the Dakota's security for weeks, but this was his last chance to confirm that his plan would work. What Chapman discovered during this surveillance was that the Dakota's security was more relaxed in the evening hours. The doorman was often distracted by residents coming and going from work, and the lighting in the courtyard created shadows that could conceal someone waiting in the right position. Most importantly, Chapman realized that anyone standing near the building's entrance would be invisible to residents approaching from the street until they were close enough to touch. At 5:15 p.m., John finished his interview and called Yoko from the studio. He was excited about how the session had gone and wanted to share some of the stories he had told Chef. During their conversation, John mentioned that he was thinking about walking home instead of taking a taxi. The evening was unusually warm for December, and he wanted to enjoy being outside after spending the afternoon in a windowless studio. Yoko later said that something in John's voice during that call made her nervous, though she couldn't explain why. He sounded happy, but also restless, like he was excited about something I couldn't see, she remembered. I asked him to take a taxi home, but he laughed and said fresh air would do him good. That phone call was the last normal conversation John Lennon would ever have. The final hours of John Lennon's life were spent doing the things that had always brought him the most joy, making music and spending time with his family. After his interview, John returned to the Hit Factory's recording studio to work on rough demos for songs he wanted to include on his next album. Producer Jack Douglas was there, along with several session musicians who had been working on Double Fantasy. During this session, John recorded what would become his final musical performance, a brief acoustic version of Help that he wanted to rearrange for his upcoming album. The recording, which wasn't discovered until years later, shows John in a reflective mood, changing some of the lyrics to reflect his growth as a person and artist. Instead of singing "Help me if you can, I'm feeling down," he sang "Help me if you can, I'm feeling fine," transforming the Beatles' cry for help into an expression of gratitude. John seemed almost peaceful that evening, Douglas remembered. He kept talking about how lucky he was to have Yoko and Sean, how grateful he felt to be making music again. There was something almost spiritual about his mood, like he had found some kind of resolution about his life. At 6:30 am, John called the Dakota to speak with Sean. His 5-year-old son had been asking when his father would be home, and John promised to be back in time to read him a bedtime story. During their brief conversation, Sean told John about a drawing he had made of their family, and John promised to hang it on the refrigerator when he got home. It was a perfectly ordinary father-son conversation, the kind they had shared hundreds of times. What John didn't know was that Chapman had been listening to his radio interview from earlier that day and had become increasingly agitated by what he heard. In the interview, John had talked about his wealth, his comfortable lifestyle, and his contentment with his life. To Chapman's disturbed mind, this was proof that John had become the kind of phony that Chapman despised. The man who had once sung about having no possessions was now living in a multi-million-dollar apartment, talking about his success and happiness as if he deserved them more than his fans did. Chapman's mental state was deteriorating rapidly. Witnesses outside the Dakota later described him as talking to himself, pacing back and forth, and occasionally laughing at nothing. When other fans tried to engage him in conversation, Chapman would respond with rambling monologues about authenticity, celebrity, and the corrupting influence of fame. At 7:45 p.m., Chapman made his final preparation for murder. He walked to a nearby restaurant and ordered a hamburger, though he barely touched it. According to the waitress who served him, Chapman kept checking a small notebook filled with what appeared to be times and addresses. He paid his check with exact change and left without saying a word. Chapman returned to his position outside the Dakota at 8:30 p.m., just as the evening rush hour was ending and the building's residents were beginning to return home from work. He positioned himself in the shadows near the entrance, pulled his copy of The Catcher in the Rye from his coat pocket, and began reading while he waited. At 10:50 p.m., John Lennon left the Hit Factory for the last time. He was carrying the same manila folder he had brought that morning, now filled with lyrics and musical ideas for future projects. John was planning to spend the evening at home with Yoko and Sean, reviewing the rough mixes from his recording session and discussing plans for the next day's work. The decision to walk home instead of taking a taxi would prove fatal. John later told the doorman that he wanted to clear his head after spending all day indoors, and the 20-minute walk from Midtown to the Upper West Side had always been one of his favorite New York experiences. On that particular evening, the streets were relatively quiet, and John enjoyed the anonymity of being just another pedestrian in the city that never sleeps. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell. We're approaching the most crucial moments of December 8th, and what happens next will shock you. What John didn't realize was that Chapman had anticipated this decision. During his weeks of surveillance, Chapman had noticed that John often walked home from the studio on pleasant evenings, and Chapman had timed his route down to the minute. By 10:55 p.m., Chapman knew exactly when John would arrive at the Dakota, which entrance he would use, and how much time Chapman would have to complete his plan. At 10:58 p.m., John turned the corner onto 72nd Street and saw the familiar outline of the Dakota's entrance ahead. He was less than 2 minutes from safety, less than 2 minutes from seeing his wife and son, less than 2 minutes from the life that had finally brought him peace and happiness. Chapman saw John approaching and stood up from where he had been sitting in the shadows. For a moment, the two men looked directly at each other, and Chapman later said that John seemed to recognize him from their encounter that morning. John nodded politely and continued walking toward the entrance. What happened next took place in less than 30 seconds, but those 30 seconds changed music history forever. As John reached the Dakota's entrance, Chapman stepped out of the shadows and called his name. John turned around, probably expecting another autograph request, and found himself facing a man who no longer looked like the harmless fan from that morning. Chapman's expression had changed completely, his earlier nervousness replaced by something cold and determined. "Mr. Lennon," Chapman said, his voice steady for the first time all day. John took a step closer, perhaps trying to understand what Chapman wanted. That step brought him within arm's reach of his killer, close enough for Chapman to see the confusion in John's eyes as he realized that something was very wrong. Chapman pulled the gun from his coat pocket and fired 5 shots in rapid succession. The bullets struck John in the back and shoulder, spinning him around and sending him stumbling toward the Dakota's entrance. John managed to take 6 steps before collapsing in the building's vestibule, blood spreading across the marble floor where he had walked safely thousands of times before. The last words John Lennon ever spoke were, "I'm shot." Chapman remained standing in the same spot where he had fired the gun, calmly reading The Catcher in the Rye as if nothing had happened. When the police arrived 4 minutes later, they found him sitting on the curb, the book open in his lap and the gun on the ground beside him. The ambulance carrying John Lennon arrived at Roosevelt Hospital at 11:15 p.m., but doctors knew immediately that there was nothing they could do. The bullets had caused massive internal damage, and John had lost too much blood to survive. At 11:20 p.m., Dr. Stephen Lynn pronounced John Lennon dead, ending a life that had touched millions of people around the world. Yoko, who had followed the ambulance to the hospital, was alone in the emergency room when she received the news. Her first words were reportedly, "Tell me it's not true," repeated over and over as the reality of what had happened began to sink in. She remained at the hospital for 3 hours, unable to accept that the man she had loved for 12 years was gone. Back at the Dakota, hundreds of fans had gathered outside the building where John died. They sang Beatles songs, shared memories, and tried to understand how someone who had preached love and peace could be killed by one of his own admirers. The vigil continued for days, with people from around the world coming to pay their respects to a man who had meant more to them than they ever knew. But even as the world mourned John Lennon's death, questions were already being raised about how Chapman had been able to carry out his plan so easily. FBI files released decades later revealed that Chapman had been on a federal watch list since 1979, when he had made threats against other celebrities. Law enforcement agencies knew he owned firearms and had a history of mental illness, but no one connected him to the suspicious activity around the Dakota in the weeks before John's murder. Even more disturbing, witnesses came forward claiming they had seen Chapman outside the Dakota as early as October, always carrying the same copy of The Catcher in the Rye and always asking the same questions about John's schedule. Security cameras from nearby buildings showed Chapman conducting what appeared to be systematic surveillance, but none of this information reached the Dakota's security staff or John's personal protection team. The most haunting aspect of John Lennon's murder is how preventable it was. Chapman's behavior in the days leading up to December 8th was so obviously threatening that multiple people noticed and remembered it. His questions about John's routine, his obsessive note-taking, his increasingly agitated demeanor, all of it should have triggered alarm bells for anyone trained in security protocols. Take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think John's murder could have been prevented if people had been more aware of the warning signs? Your insights help us understand how tragedies like this might be avoided in the future. December 8th, 1980, ended the life of John Lennon, but it also marked the beginning of something else, the transformation of a man into a myth. In death, John became everything he had been trying to escape in life, a symbol, an icon, a figure whose meaning belonged more to the world than to the people who had actually known and loved him. The tragedy of John's final day isn't just that it ended in violence, it's that it ended a life that was finally finding peace. After years of struggle, addiction, and psychological manipulation, John had discovered what happiness looked like. He was making music that satisfied him artistically, building a relationship with his son that brought him joy, and looking forward to a future that seemed full of possibility. Chapman's bullets didn't just kill John Lennon, they killed all the music he would never write, all the love he would never share, all the moments of ordinary happiness that make life worth living. Today, the Dakota still stands on 72nd Street, and fans still gather outside to remember the man who died there 43 years ago. But the real memorial to John Lennon isn't found in any building or monument. It's found in the music he left behind, in the love he shared, and in the reminder that even the most famous people in the world are vulnerable to the random violence of someone else's madness. John Lennon's final day teaches us that life is precious because it is fragile, that love matters because it can end without warning, and that the only way to honor the dead is to live fully while we can. In our next episode, we'll explore the FBI's secret files on John Lennon and reveal why the US government considered a musician such a threat that they planned to deport him. Because sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who sing about love and peace. If this story moved you, please subscribe and share this video with anyone who believes that music can change the world. Leave a comment with your favorite John Lennon memory, and don't forget to hit that notification bell for more untold stories from music history. Because the truth about our heroes is always more powerful than the myths we build around them, and John Lennon's truth is worth remembering.